Cancer Council New South Wales acknowledges the traditional custodians, both past and present, of the lands on which we live and work. Welcome to you all. My name is Lauren McLean, and tonight we were talking about caring for the carer. Firstly, for any technical problems, please post your question in the chat box or phone 1800 733 416, and that number's also at the top of your chat box if you've forgotten it. If you have any sound problems, you can listen in using your phone by calling the 1800 number and entering the passcode that's also showing in the chat box. We encourage you all to use the chat box this evening. Tell each other what you're thinking, share your stories. Can you relate to one another? We hope that the information is useful to you. This webinar is being recorded, so if you get caught up in the chat box or you miss something that the presenters say, don't worry. We'll send you the link to the recording and it will be uploaded to the Cancer Council website in the coming days. If at any stage throughout the webinar you need to speak to someone urgently, please do not hesitate to contact a Lifeline counsellor on 13 11 14, available 24/7. So let's get started. Firstly, I'd like to introduce our lovely panel for this evening. This evening we've got John and Kim joining us, so welcome.
Thank you.
We've also got Jill tuning in the chat box, so everyone say hello to Jill. Unfortunately, we need to apologise, our carer was unable to attend tonight's webinar. So I'll hand over to Kim now to kick us off and get underway. Thank you.
So good evening, my name's Kim Hobbs. I'm a social worker at Westmead Hospital in Sydney. And I think just before I start, I'd like to say it's interesting that we've not had success tonight in getting a carer to be able to attend at 7 o'clock at night in the city. And that probably tells us what a tough job it is to be a carer and how difficult it can be to find time for yourself. And we'll come back to that as we go through the talk tonight. So you all know that if you want to get the best cancer treatment, you need the right scans and operations and pathology reviews and therapies. But care from the oncology team should encompass partners, families, carers, friends, colleagues, and all the people that make up the communities of the patients that we meet. But the needs of partners and family members are often overlooked. As health professionals, we tend to see them as care providers rather than as a population in need of support themselves. So we're very good at saying to people, oh, have you got someone to bring you for radiotherapy? Have you got someone to look after you once you go home from hospital? But we're not so good at looking at what is happening for the person who's doing the driving and doing the caring. So as a result, carers are often the silent partners in the treatment experience. They have been referred to in the literature as second-order patients. And if we were to give them some of the distress and anxiety and depression scales that some patients regularly fill in for us, we may find that their levels are higher than for patients themselves. And this is probably because we're not making enough effort to look after their needs. And as carers, you probably don't know where to go to access resources and services for yourselves. So let's start with the definition. This one comes from Carers Australia. I've got the website address there because if you are a carer and you want more information about caring, this is a good place to go. They have branches in every state and they provide some online and telephone support and counselling as well as information resources. So they tell us that carers provide unpaid care and support to family members and friends who have a disability, a mental illness, a chronic condition, a terminal illness, an alcohol or other drug issue, or who are frail aged. And thinking through your own caring experiences, maybe the people for whom you're caring have got more than one of those categories. The fact is that unless you're a hermit or a reclusive person, everybody in our community has some caring responsibilities. So even before the cancer came along, we were all busy caring for someone in our lives. And this is an additional caring responsibility that you've picked up along the way. So all carers have legitimate needs, and that is to share their concerns, to address their own needs for physical and emotional well-being, and to take time out. It's a big problem 2.7 million carers in Australia, the census in 2015 told us. 10% of them are aged over 75, and so that comes with some ageing problems of their own. 38% of them have an illness themselves. Perhaps the person for whom you're providing cancer care has had a cancer diagnosis as well. And 70% are women. What is a challenge some of the challenges for carers? You can tell me better than I can. So carers are protective of the person for whom they're caring, and they may not disclose their own needs and vulnerabilities. It may seem to be to them to be unfair to say, I have needs, when the person who's going through cancer treatment also has needs. So caregiving increases psychological distress, and that may negatively impact on the carer's physical and mental health. And as you all know, it's exhausting being a cheer squad. But cancer doesn't occur in isolation. You are already living a full life, often involving other caring responsibilities. And so the way you cope and adjust to being a carer of someone with cancer may be compounded by other factors. Maybe you're worried about finances, that you're losing income through caring, that the person who's being treated for cancer is losing income. At least employment is disrupted, and there are costs associated with treatment, even in the lucky country where we have a free universal healthcare system. There's disruption to lifestyles and plans. You have other responsibilities. Maybe you're looking after parents who have dementia, adult children with mental health disabilities, grandchildren. And it's a lonely and isolating place to be. And above all, you're probably worried about what the future holds and don't really have anywhere to take that worry and to express it. So we know that carers don't have good formal and informal supports. We need to recognise that you have your own health problems or may have your own health problems. Navigating the healthcare system is a daunting experience, even for those of us who work in it. And lack of knowledge about where to get assistance. The myths and misconceptions and stigma still in the 21st century about cancer. And then because you feel burdened and tired and overwhelmed, maybe you feel guilty because after all, you're not the one who has cancer. And so you don't want to verbalise your worries about what the future holds. And there's a bit of a imperative to always think positive and to be the person who's supporting the person being treated for cancer. So it can put a strain on relationships. We often hear that the adjustment of the person with cancer and their carer are out of sync. Intimate relationships may particularly suffer during this time of stress. But the good news is that many relationships experience no long-term change and some relationships improve, but only if you can communicate respectfully and openly discuss your issues. That's both for the person who's been treated for cancer and for the many people who are involved in caring for them. And there's a bit of an elephant in the room. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about anger. Nice people in our society hide their anger. We suppress it, we internalise it, we pretend it isn't there. Carers in particular are vulnerable to this because they might think they have no right to be angry. But as a society generally, we're not very good at dealing with negative emotions such as anger. We don't want to be seen as troublemakers. We're pretty good at expressing when things are going well, but we're not so good at expressing when we're angry and distressed. But it's normal. Anger is okay. It becomes destructive if it's not confronted and handled and resolved. Keeping the lid on the pressure valve isn't helpful. So what might you be angry about? The complete upheaval of your future plans. You thought you knew where you were going with your family, your children, your employment. You might have wanted to travel and to study. You might be angry at the whole world. Why did this happen to us? We're good people. There are lots of people out there who deserve this more than we do. You might feel angry for yourself, that maybe you did something or didn't do something in the past for which you're blaming yourself or feeling remorseful. And sometimes it's just plain irrational and illogical. Did anything I did or failed to do cause this cancer? So lots of reasons to feel angry. How do you manage your anger? You need to effectively communicate. Communication can become conflicted as feelings of anger and irritation collide with that sense of gratitude of successful cancer treatment. I should be happy. I should be celebrating that we've had successful treatment, and yet I feel angry that this has happened to us. And so sometimes you hit out at those who are closest to you. You know that their love and support is unwavering and unconditional, and so in a way it's almost safer to hit out to them than to others. And family and friends may not understand your anger. Openly communicate before there's a destructive explosion. So in effective communication, I thought I might spend a little bit of time on what not to say. As a carer, try to avoid all those "aren't you lucky" statements. Aren't you lucky that they found the cancer early, or that the treatment worked? Aren't you lucky you've been given a second chance? Aren't you lucky your life's been saved? And the side effects weren't too bad, were they? The person with cancer probably isn't feeling very lucky, and so as a carer, one of the things you can do is to avoid the lucky statements and to acknowledge just how tough it's been for them and for you. Continuing on with the what not to say, try to avoid the don't worry statements. Don't worry that you've lost your breast or your hair or your job or your chance to have a baby. You're still alive. I still love you. That's all that really matters. Don't worry. This was a small price to pay for your life. You're still the same person underneath. None of these were experiences patients wanted to have. Worry is normal, and to be able to sit with someone and feel their worry with them is a really powerful tool. Unhelpful responses can be keep your chin up, stay positive, hope for the best. That's exhausting if you're the person who's trying to get through difficult treatment. It's not possible, and it shouldn't be possible to be always thinking positive. It's normal to have anger, to have fear, and to have doubt. It's acceptable to express that as a concern. So we need to express our worries, acknowledge them, and resolve them. And do remember that there is no evidence that negative thinking causes cancer to progress or to recur. So carers play a really important role in allowing the person with cancer to express their darkest fears and to be real about what's happening to them. But does it matter? Yeah, why do we really need to look after the wellbeing of carers? Haven't we got enough to do looking after the patients? Well, it's really important because the primary source of social support for the person with cancer is their immediate caregiver. And research tells us that social support is one of the most crucial factors in allowing coping and adjustment of people with cancer. So it follows that we need to give equal attention to the needs and the supportive care needs and the emotional needs of the caregivers of someone with cancer. And furthermore, research shows that caring for carers improves their coping capacities and their quality of life. But how do you manage all that? The health and welfare systems are confusing and overwhelming. And caring isn't a linear progression, it happens in episodes. So it's really hard to predict and plan when are you going to need time off work? How are you going to juggle your other responsibilities? What about financial ups and downs? And what about your own health concerns? So caregiving requires extraordinary capacity and expertise across many domains of which you may not have had the skills to manage before this happened to you. So you need to really superhuman to manage everything unless you accept help. Most people at the beginning of the caring journey don't know their needs and entitlements. Do you know what leave from employment you can get? Do you know whether there are Centrelink benefits that can help? Carer respite, services at home, legal and financial services, counselling and emotional support. Most people don't know these things before they encounter their need for them. So where can you get help? Ask at your treatment centre to speak with a psychologist or a social worker. You can do this on your own. That doesn't have to be with the patient. Sometimes it's helpful to have your own source of support. And if you really wanted to distance your own emotional needs from the treatment happening at the cancer centre, you could talk to your GP about a referral to a community-based counsellor. And you may be eligible for a mental health care plan to access Medicare subsidised counselling. Carers Australia, as I said before, has services in every state. You can phone them or go to their website. And of course, there's a Cancer Council line, 13 11 20. When caring gets particularly stressful, try to think through coping strategies that helped you at times of previous life crisis. If you've been through illness before, if you've had a marriage breakdown, if you've moved across countries or across states, what sorts of things helped you get through that transition and that adjustment? Keep alert to signs of overuse of unhelpful coping strategies, especially the excessive use of alcohol or other drugs. But the most important advice I can give you is to tell someone you're struggling before you implode. Accept offers of support and help from family if they're coming. Accept offers of help from friends and ask health professionals for help. What might help you? Writing can be good. A diary, a letter to friends, a blog. Physical activity is very good for not only your physical health but your mental health, so walking, swimming, going to the gym. Therapeutic activities like yoga or meditation, mindfulness, tai chi, qigong. Individual counselling. Very importantly, giving yourself permission to take time out. And do enjoyable activities without feeling guilty. And I'd really like to end on a positive note, because getting through cancer treatment can result in positive experiences that can only have come from facing a major life challenge with someone you care about. You may discover at the end of all this that you have closer relationships, that your perspectives about where you're heading in your future are better shared than they were before. Not that you want to use this as a way to improve your self-worth, but you might find that you have better personal strength and resilience, and your lifestyles and behaviours might have improved because of the cancer experience. So communication is the key. Take-home message for all of you: asking for help and assistance is not a sign of failure to cope. Too often we see carers who say, I can do it, I shouldn't be able to get help to do this. But it's an important step to ask for help because it empowers you to regain control, because what you all know is that the upheaval of cancer diagnosis makes you lose control of a lot of aspects of your life. That's it from me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim, for such great insights there. And I particularly like the what not to say and acknowledging that positivity is extremely exhausting for both the carer and the survivor a lot of the time as well. So I think that you made a really great point, and I could see some people connecting with that in the chat box as well.
Yeah, I read a few of the threads going through and that definitely resonated.
Yeah.
You can probably tell me a few more things not to say. I found out the hard way.
Well, if you've got any, send them through. If you've got some more not to says that you'd like to share, post them in the chat box so that everyone can know what not to say on top of some of those suggestions that Kim's made already. We're going to hand it over to John now from Canteen. So we're very lucky to have John here with us this evening. And yeah, over to you.
Thank
Share
you.
your insight.
Thanks. Now we're going to move over to the young person space. So at Canteen, we support 12 to 25-year-olds. So we age out at the age of 26 on the 26th birthday. You'll hear lots of overlaps from what Kim had mentioned, because young carers face a lot of the same challenges that older carers do. But there's also some unique ones, so we'll go through that. Now, if you have any questions, anybody out there, if you don't have children, think of nieces, nephews, any other young people in your life. A lot of the strategies and tips and tools that we'll talk about over the next couple of minutes will be applicable there. It's also helpful for grandchildren, the whole works. The other thing to look at is, if you're a school professional, there can be ways to help translate this into supporting young people in the school environment and in other professional environments. So let's go through. I'll talk you through some of the details and take it one at a time. Now, for children under the age of 12, I realize there may be some parents on here or grandparents on here that have younger children. So both Kim and I should be able to field some questions for the younger ones as well, and we can tell you where to go to for supports that may be available for the younger age cohort. So don't be bashful in asking questions about the younger ones. So just to walk you through, the Young Carer Challenge is a sizable one. So just to put it in perspective for our age demographic, again, at Canteen, 12 to 25-year-olds and aging out of that 26th birthday, There's about 1,000 young people themselves that are diagnosed with cancer, and there's about 1,000 siblings. And all in all, these are new cases each year. There's 21,000 new young people that deal with a parental diagnosis with cancer. So all up, there's 23,000, but 22,000 are young carers, and those are new presentations, as I mentioned. So to put it in perspective, particularly for our health professional colleagues that are logging in, 1 in 3 of all adults diagnosed with cancer have children under the age of 26. So 1 in 3 of every patient that comes into the hospital will be facing this challenge. Often hear from parents anecdotally, and we also see some evidence in the literature around that parents often find, how do I talk to my kids? What do I say? As one of the most challenging things they face as a parent, as a cancer patient, and as a cancer patient being a parent. So I'll walk you through these slides here to look at how we measure the impact of cancer on young people. So you can see on the left-hand side of the graph, there's a green line, and that green line is a population-based sample. So the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, they measure distress. Every couple of years, they do a survey of all Australians. So this is just a general population study. So for 11 to 15-year-olds, this is how they do the age brackets. It's right up there around 12.5%, 13% of 11 to 15-year-olds report having very high to very high levels of distress. That comes down a little bit for this older age group, which is the 16 to 25, or 24 is in their demographic there. So then the next one over is that kind of darker blue, almost purple color. That's young people that have a parent with cancer. So those are our offspring. So depending on their age range, they're 3 to 6 times more likely to be distressed than the average Australian young person. Now, because in the spirit of having, I wanted to put this in context, because then the orange line next to that are siblings. So if your brother or sister has cancer, you also demonstrate having extremely high levels of distress. So it's really important for us as adults to understand this. And I'll paint a picture as to why that is as we progress. Now, I wanted to show you where young patients come in here. So young patients that are diagnosed, you can see the red line, that kind of red-pink color. That's for young patients that are in active treatment. And then if the next one over is survivors, they're almost line ball the distress levels for young patients and survivors. But you can see how much higher the distress level is for our carer young people. So offspring are off the charts, followed closely by siblings. Now we're just cutting some data around bereaved offspring, and we're starting to see a trend that the rates go up even higher again, which would be expected. So what we're working with is an age demographic that is dealing with a very high level of distress and not a lot of life experience and how to deal with that. So as we know, offspring, as I mentioned, offspring experience very high levels of distress. Now, this is a tricky one, and this is a hard one for us parents. When the parents are really distressed, even if the young people don't know what's going on, they tend to pick that up. They're like little barometers. So they tend to match our distress, and they might not even know why. So it's important to keep in the back of our mind that oftentimes when I talk about this with parents, I get a little bit worried, and it's like, well, the best thing to do is let's take care of number one. Let's try to take care of you as a parent, and that's one of the best things we can do to support your kids. And so I often compare that to trickle-down theory in economics. Now, there's a lot of debate, and I have my own opinions on trickle-down theory in economics, but when it comes to good familial communication and reducing distress for parents and that helping children, it definitely helps children. Around that distress and family functioning, if your family's going through a hard time, if you've gone through a big thing like a divorce recently, and there's some other unmet needs before cancer comes into the picture, we can anticipate that the distress levels for the kids are going to be another notch higher. This one is, the last point there is really important around trying to understand how much you should tell the kids, because I often get that from parents going, well, how much do you say? What do you say? Am I going to make it worse? Now, one thing to keep in mind is that offspring's perception of the situation rather than the objective measure, which is the reality. So what they perceive is happening that's what their distress is rated at. So if they don't know what it is, they'll start to fantasize about what it is. Now, having worked with young people for many, many years, in this one where families haven't been able to kind of find a way to talk about cancer, I've met with a lot of young people that think their parents are getting divorced. And I'll say, why do you think your parents are getting divorced? And they'll say, I know something's wrong. I know something's really big. I can hear tears through the wall. The phone's ringing off the hook, and mom and dad are on the phone a lot. And I don't know what it is, so it must be something big like divorce. So, so that's where that perception comes in. So we'll come back and hit on that one a little bit more. And if there's any questions, happy to drill down into that. Anything specific you guys might have in mind. So from an unmet needs perspective, so when young people come to work with us, we measure for distress and we also measure for unmet need. So if you look at where that open and honest communication, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but I'm hovering over the information and open communication, that little dot point there under the biggest areas of unmet need. Information, open communication, young people are looking for that. They want to know. One of the challenges is they find it really difficult to tell their parents and other important adults in their life that they want to know that. So they'll kind of sit there silently waiting for you to open the door. They want help dealing with feelings, and this isn't just for the young ones. We're seeing these reports in our 18 to 25-year-olds. So this may be the first time they're dealing with a life-threatening illness in their family. You know, I've experienced that many times because I'm in my mid-40s now, but if you rewind back to your earlier days where you haven't had a lot of experience with dealing with that, it can be quite complicated to figure out what to do with them. How do you process those feelings? And have to remember that the brains haven't fully developed yet. So most brains, well, male brains are kind of in the mid-20s are finishing their development. Females are a little bit younger. But if you look at most of the age range that we're talking about, they're still growing. Their brains are still growing. So we as adults can see things sometimes that they don't yet see. Young people are asking for time out from their cancer experience, which means I just need to press pause on cancer. How can we press pause and concentrate on cancer all the time? I've got some strategies on that that can be really helpful. And I need support from friends and other young people with a similar experience. So overall, some of the biggest predictors of distress are young people feel isolated and alone. Because they're young, they don't often meet other young people that are also dealing with cancer. So they might be the only person who has a sibling with cancer that they know. They might be the only person with a parent with cancer that they know. So they can feel quite disenfranchised from their peer group. But they're seeking like crazy. At this age, they're seeking like crazy that support from friends. So that's something to watch how young people are functioning in their peer-to-peer life. Let me just, I thought of this as how could I show this in a visual to give you guys something that, a good way of looking at it. So let's just say this is a huge family in these days. I'm one of four, so I think that's how I came up with 4 kids here. So you have 4 kids at home, varying ages, but I'm just going to say that they're between 12 and 23. Mom gets, all of a sudden, out of the blue, mom is diagnosed. Mom's diagnosed with cancer. So off mom goes to see the medical team. A whole series. Suddenly, when you're in the cancer world, you don't just have one doctor and health professional, you have a whole team of people around you. Now, in those appointments could be partner, could be husband, could be grandparents, could be brothers, sisters. It's often another important adult in that mom's life. It's very seldom that it's a young person that comes to those appointments with the parent. So you have, if you think about information being a predictor of distress for young people then are reliant upon the parent to then go home and educate them about cancer. And so here's the loop. If the young people aren't going, now coming back to some of the statistics Kim quoted from carers, now Carers New South Wales and Carers Australia estimates about 10% of carers are young carers, and 10% of young carers are primary carers. So if we take that formula to our age cohort, we have 21,000 young carers, new cases every year in Australia. About 10% might be a young carer. In those cases, it might be one of these young adult children that would take mom to the doctor in this instance. Other times, that's not the case. And so these young people, I don't know, again, I don't know if you can see the mouse, but I'm circling over the 4 kids. Those 4 kids are not having a presence with our colleagues in the medical environment. So now, if those kids hear things through the wall, if the parents in this day and age, it's absolutely incredible, even all the way down to the age of 10, I've experienced this, but definitely a 12-year-old up, they're going to Google what they hear, and they're going to find stuff from Dr. Google, and it may not be good stuff from Dr. Google. So this is where, again, painting that picture for open and honest communication. So, so distress and unmet need. Older offspring, this is pretty interesting. I find these are details that we weren't 100% expecting to see in our research. So older offspring tend to experience more distress than younger offspring. So we definitely see quite a jump from our under 18s to our over 18s. Females tend to experience more distress than males, and this is for the young people. And in addition to that, we see, it might be on the next slide, but we see higher levels of distress when dad is diagnosed with cancer than when mom is diagnosed. It's still high with mom, but we see it slightly higher with dad. Distress and unmet need tend to be higher. Oh, I just said that. But when father has cancer, I missed that next point altogether. So need help with the family issues. So these are, again, this is from the voice of young people. They want to talk openly about their parents' cancer. But I don't know how to do that. And I don't know how to talk about how I'm feeling. I feel like I need to be supported. Again, this is still for our over 18s, remember. And to feel my parents are being open with me about the cancer. Now, I've worked with a lot of families where things haven't gone so well in treatment, and a young person hasn't had the best communication, and they wish they had heard the truth. And then they have to deal with that parent saying, why weren't you truthful with me? Even though it was bad news, I really wanted to know it then. So it can end up creating a minefield down the track. So now around info and communication, a closed family communication style. Now this is the kind of family I was raised in. We never talked about any health stuff. Old school, mom was old school, her parents were old school. And we never had open communication about anything. In fact, like we have a long history of high blood pressure on my mom's side of the family. She didn't even tell me until I was 35. And I was like, well, it'd be important for me to track that with my GP. So, but if you can try to find a way to have open and honest communication, we can see that it helps to mitigate some of the stress responses that young people have, because again, if they don't know what it is, they'll start to fantasize what it is. And if you think about that from an adjustment perspective, the young person spends a lot of energy adjusting to something they fantasize, like mom and dad are getting divorced, and not to the cancer itself. So it's exhausting adjusting to something when you've made it up and it's actually not the right thing to adjust to. So that honest and age-appropriate communication helps. Now, there are some ways to adjust the communication. We can, if there's questions around age appropriateness, then we can look at that around definitely some different strategies for the younger cohort, particularly those under 12s, and with young adults. But as a general rule of thumb, open and honest can be the way to go. Now, if the news is particularly challenging, there's one little caveat on that honest and open communication, is that if the news is particularly tricky, like you've received poor prognosis from your doctor or treatment team, at the end, to have a little ray of hope at the end. So say, look, we've had some really difficult news from the doctor. They think that I might only have 6 months to live, but we're working really hard to find the answers to that. The doctors are trying to find every treatment. We're not going to give up hope. And so a little ray of hope like that can be a helpful caveat at the end, but to be honest about it so that the kids can't come back and say, but you told me everything was going to be fine. Now, we also see that parents want guidance in communicating with offspring, and they feel like it's one of the most challenging issues. And I think every now and again I look over at the thread because I can see people typing, and yes, I wish I had a magic wand to help this be easier. It's really tough stuff. And young people, offspring really want to communicate. They want to understand their parents' views. And it's important, just like that dotted line where I said Dr. Google will come in, they value that the parents can be a source of truth for them. And because they're not going to the doctor's office with the parents, they have that missing loop of information. So that's where it's fortunate and unfortunate in some ways, where the parents become the primary educator about the cancer experience. So this is from a study that's directly from the mouths of offspring. Now, years ago, when we were first working with Cancer Council on creating the Talking to Kids About Cancer booklet, we had lots of evidence from the familial communication side of things, but not from the young people themselves. And what we see is that the stuff parents are looking to do, and the advice that we're giving parents around open and honest communication goes like this and dovetails with what young people want. So young people are saying, can the parents demonstrate coping behaviors for us? Can we try to maintain normalcy at home? Be really incredibly helpful if I can still talk about my boyfriends, girlfriends, sport, all of those kind of things in addition to the cancer. They want to be available for the children. This is even from 23, 24-year-olds. Can you create that space for being available for me? And this is, I love this one because the children, I call this like opening the door to communication. The kids want the parents to open that door because they're more than likely they're not going to open it themselves. So they're looking for that door to be opened. And to be aware of my behavior, I thought this was pretty insightful for young people. Notice if my behavior is changing, because I know my behavior is changing and I need you to pick that up. And can you please, again, spend some quality time with me? So some of the common parental concerns, now this is through all age ranges, and probably my mom would argue that she still worries about these things for me, because no matter how old your kids are, they're still your kids, even if they're in their 50s or 60s. So interpreting behavior. So I hear this a lot when I talk to parents. Is this normal, or is this because of my cancer? Is my 15-year-old being an absolute nightmare right now, or is the cancer making it worse? It could be a little bit of both, or it could be one or the other. But so we could go on an exploratory conversation there. But and I'll come to how to assess things. And Kim mentioned it before, like what was it like before cancer? Often your predictor there is how were things going before cancer came along? Assess that. Then you can kind of compare it to what it's like after cancer. Is there a difference? But I hear that's a really common thing. So if you're thinking that, you're not alone. I've talked to probably hundreds of parents that have been curious about that one. Change or loss of role. I used to drive to football practice. I used to go to cricket games all the time. I used to go to netball. My role is now changed. How do I deal with that? How much and when do I tell them? Talking about death terrifies me. What if my kids ask me if I'm going to die? What do I say? Will I make it worse if I talk to them more openly? How do I break the ice? It's fine to think about how I can get things going, but I have to have that first conversation, and I'm terrified of doing that. Another tricky one is involving the school versus keeping the child's wishes. Kids are like, nope, school's my sanctuary. I don't want you to say anything. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I call it the illusion of choice. We have to involve the school. How do you want to participate in that? Because at school, they see your kids 8 hours a day, and they can see any of the little things that they might notice that there's been changes in their behavior. They're part of the team. So it can be really helpful to get the school involved, particularly if they're so in our age demographic, that's end of primary into high school, and then moving into university life and then early adulthood. Genetics and timing, that's a tricky one, and we can see if there's any specific questions there. When do we do around the timing? I've worked with plenty of moms that have come to me saying, I've been diagnosed with breast cancer, I have BRCA1, BRCA2, I have 12 to 15-year-old daughters, I'm concerned about their breasts, when do we test them? And the best advice there is talk to your doctor, go talk to a genetics counselor, and they can give you the most appropriate advice. And does this mean my kids are more susceptible? So I've had cancer now, are my kids more at risk? So overall, looking at parental concerns, whether you're the patient or the carer, these are big burning questions that you have. No wonder it's difficult to think about how can I talk openly to my kids about this. So this is coming from exploring strengths, and I heard a lot of this from what Kim was saying. Looking at how your families did talk about it before the cancer diagnosis. Now, one thing I've learned from most families, if you have multiple children, or if you have multiple grandkids or multiple nieces and nephews, do you have a different relationship with each of those young people? And the answer is almost always yes. I've never heard no. So look at what were the unique strengths with each of those young people. So some of the best advice I've heard is that the old conventional sit around the table and everybody gets the news at the same time. That may not be the most enabling way to talk about some of these difficult subjects. So find your strengths that you had before cancer with each individual. So when and where, how did you talk to them? Was it driving in the car with one of the young people? Was it, playing catch in the backyard with the other? Was it just before bedtime when you're having a bit more quiet time and you have a bit of communication with another one? Harness your expertise in your kids or in your nieces, nephews, whoever it is in your life. And who are the primary communicators? Now, one thing to be mindful of in the parent group, and this is something that can often be challenging for carers, is if the adult who's diagnosed with cancer is the primary communicator to the kids. So most of the conversations around homework, all of those things, sex and drugs and all the difficult things we have to worry about as parents when you're trying to educate your children and how to be raised in this new world of ours, suddenly it's the other parent that's the primary communicator. So is this the first conversation that this parent has had? And we need to be mindful of how we balance that. So I have seen that the first news that a dad has given, because mom's been a primary communicator, mom's been diagnosed, and the kids, it's kind of like a shoot the messenger. So I develop a team approach and hand that over gradually. So communicating about cancer, so looking back at your strengths before cancer, now looking at your experience after cancer comes in. So is it different? Yep. I haven't met a family yet that hadn't thought it was different. What do the kids already know? Now, for older carers on here, oftentimes we work with young people, the 18 to 25-year-old range, that have primary caring responsibilities for the younger kids at home. So what do they already know? What do you want them to know, and what do you need them to know? And an important thing here is often the thing that you feel like you want to avoid telling them is probably one of the most important things you need to tell them. And those are really difficult things. And if you're finding that a challenge, if you're at your hospital, you go in and you speak to your lovely social worker like him, and they can help you navigate that stuff. If you have any other challenges, you can call Cancer Council, give Canteen a call, and we'll see if we can help you to explore those challenges that you're experiencing. Customizing to each young person, it really helps. You have that relationship, and you have that expertise in that young person. Customize it to their need. And who else is communicating with the kids? Now, I see this is a big influencer, particularly for under 16s. If you as parents are saying one thing, and your grandparents and your parents, the children's grandparents, are saying another, and aunties and uncles are saying another, and another important adult, it can be really confusing for particularly the younger age range and the under 12s. So I like to call it a united front. If you can, this is like in an ideal world, it's not easy, but trying to have a consistent message from each of the important adults in the children's lives can help to make the adjustment for that young person much smoother, because they're not questioning who's telling me the right thing here, because I'm hearing different stories from different people, and I trust all of them. So now, open and honest communication is extremely effective. Now, my challenge to everyone is to try to reframe protective instincts. So our normal, I think quite a normal human response for parents is to go, I'm going to protect them by not telling them about this. I want to protect them from this horrible news. I would try to reframe that to say, by offering open and honest communication, that is helping to protect the children and helping their adjustment. So that's an easier said than done, but that's my challenge to everybody who signed up today and logged in. Now, this is a tip that is almost unfair to share, because it's wonderfully effective not only for parent-child kind of relationships, but between couples and anybody else who's important in your life. And this is where young people want that timeout. Remember that timeout thing we saw on the previous slide? Developing a communication contract. So you set a day and time, whatever the interval is. So for any parents out there, grandparents or aunties and uncles that want to try to, okay, when am I going to talk and support my 15-year-old that's in my life? So you say, I have to at least talk to them once a week. If I don't talk to them once a week, I'm going to just go nuts. I need to check in and make sure they're okay, all of those things. So there you go. You found your interval. You need to set the interval at weekly. Find a date and time. Where is that communication strength you have? Sunday afternoons, downtime, normally family time, we can have nice conversation time. So that's when you can say, look, we're going to set a 15 to 30-minute period that we'll talk about the cancer stuff, anything that comes up. Now, unless there's an emergency update that I need to let you know in the time between, the rest of the time we'll talk about everything else. We'll talk about schoolwork, we'll talk about what it's like at sport, we'll talk about whatever it is. So you can limit it to only those certain points in time. So that way you don't have to, nobody has to walk around on eggshells between those time points. Everybody has permission to not talk about cancer and to get on with other stuff too. So look, some of the challenges is, and Kim alluded to this, adult oncology is primarily targeted to patient care. Now, that's mainly because of staffing. There's a lot of adults diagnosed with cancer. We want, in the system, we really want to be able to support carers and young carers equally, but it's incredibly difficult. It's much different than a pediatric environment. There's much more staff in pediatric hospitals, and the whole family is looked after. But that model in adult oncology, there's just too many patients diagnosed to really do that in a full way. Now, adult cancer carers tend to reach for support late, once their cup is way overflowing. So I always have this dream that as soon as a patient is diagnosed, then the carer has a link to talk to somebody right away, before the cup runs over. So now when I apply that to young carers have lower levels of health and mental health literacy. So than us older adults. What that means is that they may not reach for support unless the connection is made on their behalf. So the difference there between adult carers and young carers is that health and mental health literacy and that help-seeking behavior. So that's not quite ingrained yet. So I know, I think I heard Kim say, I think it might be on my next slide, but I know if I'm not sleeping well, I know that if I start having too many drinks after work, that something's bothering me, or if my stomach's off and I'm not eating properly. I know that something's bothering me, and I'm proactive about doing something about it. Young people don't have that quite wired yet. So it's up to us to notice those things. And if you remember from a previous slide, young people are looking to say, hey, parents, notice if I've had a change here. Self-care, number one. Look, as challenging as it is, self-care is vital. So if you don't reach for support or take it up when it's offered, then the existing networks in the hospital and in NGOs like where I work, we don't know that we need to reach out to you. So it's really hard because you're doing so much, you're in a caring role, but unless you put your hand up, we can't see that you need it. You don't know that support. So that I would come back to Kim's point to say, it is not a sign that you've done something wrong, or you failed, or that you're weak, that you've reached for support. That, to me, it's a sign of strength that you've reached for support, and would encourage you to do so as early as possible. So be mindful, something to be mindful of, and this is something that we see with young people a lot, but I think it's relevant for anyone who's older that's logged in here today as well. It's really important to have social, recreation, educational, physical fitness, sports in your life, any of those type of hobbies. If you start to notice that these things starting to drop off during your caring duties, those are things that I'd like you to bring attention to. Because if too many of those fall off, those are the things that recharge your batteries. Those are the things that keep you grounded and keep you able to keep doing the caring that you do. If we start to see changes in any of these areas for young people, I start to go, oh, okay, something's going on for them. And if they stop playing netball, then I know that it's going to be a big physical fitness outlet, stress release for that young person. And that's going to be a big loss for them socially as well. So those are things that highlight to me that, okay, maybe we need to try to see if there's some way we can support this family in having this young person be able to continue with those types of things. So keep recharging your batteries. And it's unique for each of you, so there's no one magic formula. So one way I like to put it, and I heard this from somebody, and I wish I could remember, it was at a conference, I can't remember who said it, but I'll care for me so that I can care for you. So I think that's a slogan that all carers should embrace, because the more that you care for yourself, the more that you'll be able to help care care for those around you and that person that you love that is dealing with a cancer diagnosis. How are we going for time?
Yeah, we're pretty good, and
Okay.
we'll just allow a bit of time for questions.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. I think this is the last slide. Now to check in with young people. So from a self-care perspective, young people you might need to check in with them about it because they probably, with that low help seeking I was mentioning, they're probably not going to take that first step themselves. There are some that do that, but it's not common. So young people can be masters of masking their distress from their parents. That's their protective instinct. So I often see parents protecting the young people, and then I see the young people protecting the parents, and what they're really looking for is the exact same thing. But what we know from the young people is that they're looking to the parent to take the punt rather than them to take the punt. And that's for both offspring and siblings. So, and as I mentioned before, and it's just a reiteration, adults, look for the key changes. So as a health professional working in this space, if you're telling me I'm really worried about my young person, say, well, what types of things have you noticed? And these are things that the school often will help you to see if they're high school aged or end of or late primary age. Were they social and now they're isolating? Or were they isolating and now they're social? How are they going with their friendships? Have you noticed a change in their sleep patterns? Have you noticed a change in their eating patterns? For older adolescents, and this is back to Kim's point, have you noticed that maybe they're doing some more risk-taking stuff? Are they experimenting more with alcohol and drugs? Have you noticed sexualized behaviors? Something that's different than before. So unmitigated kind of distress for young people, particularly as they get a little bit older, they can start moving, unfortunately, into some risk-taking behaviors. Because they're not sure how to process all these complex emotions that are going on. So sometimes that can manifest in behaviors that can really lead to some troubles. So just keep your eyes out for that. So if I heard this from a parent that they were really social, now they're isolated. They're not sleeping like they used to. In fact, I got a report from the school that they're sleeping in class because they're not sleeping at night. They're not concentrating the way they used to at university or in high school. So you've noticed that they're just picking with their food and not eating it when they used to have a voracious appetite. Those are all things that, hey, we might need to escalate here and try to get some support in place for that young person. And as I mentioned in that previous slide, even if a young person doesn't want it, it can be really helpful to call in the cavalry for that school or university services because there are student welfare programs in both high school environment and university environment.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
So great and so interesting to think about the whole family dynamics. And whilst I think there was a few questions there in the chat box around spouses and supporting, the extended family and spouses supporting the cancer patient as well. But I think so much of what you've said is so relatable to, those other family members as well. And we'll dive straight into the questions and we'll go a little bit over time tonight just so that we have some more time to address some of these questions. But because I think there's some really important ones and some great chat happening there. And perhaps to kick off, I might throw to you, Kim, with that first question, which is, how do you take time to look after yourself without that feeling of guilt and also that perception of others that you're being uncaring by doing something for yourself?
Yeah. So firstly, that perception of guilt or that you're being uncaring comes more from the carer than from the people around them. Most people with cancer and the other carers around them would say, I really wish he or she would take some time out for themselves. So you need to get over that. You then need to take up those offers of help. Someone says, what can I do? You can come round for 2 hours on Saturday afternoon so I can go off and have a round of golf or see a movie or go for coffee with my best friend. So as a community, we're not very good at accepting offers for help. And so if you are the person who's supporting the carer, instead of saying, what can I do? Maybe what you can say is, can I come round for 2 hours? Tell me when it would be a good time for me to come and sit with the person who's not well and you go out and do something for yourself. So, I think get over your own feelings about being guilty and recognise that this is a marathon you're in and the only way of keeping up your endurance is to look after yourself. John's words about, if I care for myself, then I can care for you.
Yeah. So I guess it's just allowing yourself that permission to have that time. Great. I feel like we touched on the second point a little bit, so we might skip through to how can I care for my carer when, you're so tied up in focusing on your treatment and getting yourself better, but still, I guess, also probably worrying about your partner or, worrying for that person who's also caring for you. So, being the patient, focusing on the treatment. I guess who wants to take that one?
We've talked about communication, and that's what it is. So we do a lot of second guessing. So we make some assumptions about how someone's coping with treatment. We make some assumptions about how someone's coping with caring. But unless you sit down, and John talked about this particularly with young carers, and it's equally applicable to any age, we all have other things going on in our lives. So while I'm trying to help you get through your cancer treatment, I'm also looking after my parents who have dementia. I'm worried about my daughter who has really significant mental health issues. I'm worried about my other son who's a single parent of preschoolers. So caring is tough, no matter whether you're the person caring for someone with cancer or someone else. If we can talk about what's difficult and what might relieve that stress, then that's half the battle, and then accept the offers for help to address those.
And there's, building on that from on Kim's response there, one of my favorite kind of sayings is communication about cancer is a process, not an event. Cancer, it can be like this, up and down, and might be an active treatment, and then you're off the treatment for 6 to 8 weeks or whatever, and then, you got to go back on 6 rounds of chemo, or you're going back to radiotherapy. And so the communication needs change as you go through. So anticipating that the more that you can try to practice communication at those different time points, even though it becomes less and less difficult the more you do it. It's kind of like working out a muscle in a gym you've never worked out before. So the first couple times it really hurts, it can be really difficult, but once you get there, then it's kind of like riding a bike.
So that keeping on checking in. We've had one conversation about it, but where are we next week and where are we next month?
Yeah, someone once told me, in that caring role, you wear a lot of different hats depending on, the mood that your patient or the person you're caring for is in that day. You've got to sort of learn to go with the flow in terms of what communication you think they might want, and then with that, wearing a different hat to sort of suit their needs and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
So for the person who asked that question, it's about saying to your carer, today and tomorrow I think are going to be pretty good days for me. Why don't you go off and do something for yourself? Next week when I'm having chemo, I'm going to need you around a lot more. And so, this is our window of opportunity to do something nice for ourselves.
Yeah, it really sounds like that communication is key. I found this one was an interesting one that someone sent in. Is it typical that a carer would seek help, if they're feeling distressed? Like, do many carers actually put their hand up and say, hey, I need some help too?
No.
Not until it's really late.
Yeah.
Like when the proverbial hits the fan, that's when I tend to, historically, that's when I've seen it.
And one doesn't want to stereotype too much, but men aren't very good at asking help because there's a perception in our community that men are strong and tough and they can do it all and take everything on. So it's quite uncommon to ask for help, but hopefully we've given a message tonight that it's okay to ask for help and to ask for it separately from the person who's being treated for cancer.
Yeah. And we'll send out, with every webinar, we do a follow-up with not only the webinar recording, but a link to some useful resources that the panel has referred to tonight. So if you are looking to get some help, we can try and put some information in that resource pack for you to be able to reach out to someone and get some help for yourself as a carer. This next question, again, relates to young adults under a lot of pressure, school and university and, all those competing demands. And this one's sort of coming from parents who might not see the need and friends unable to get close. So I guess Canteen's a great option to sort of encourage people to try and access.
Definitely. There's a a few different approaches to this in my experience. For health professionals, if health professionals are facing this, it can often be getting permission to, can I make the referral for you? Because because of the low levels of help-seeking behavior, if a young person gets a brochure, we can try to give them a little brochure, a little bit of information, but it's pretty unusual that then they'll jump to the phone to make a call. A bit more promising to log into a thing like our website to do some peer-to-peer support. But that first link between a young person going from not being supported to being supported, if we can try to connect those two dots for them, that can be really helpful. So from a health professional perspective, that's helpful, but it's also helpful from normally for if we have challenges where the parents may not see that they need it. And again, I see that a lot. Parents often, so what we see in the literature is that they say parents often underestimate the impact, and I have seen that. But and why? Because as I mentioned in one of my slides, is that young people are have wonderful cloaking devices in trying to hide that from their parents because they don't want their parents to worry about them. And so, but they're using that cloaking device and their distress is way off the charts. So that's where aunties and uncles often get calls from aunties and uncles and other adults to say, is there anything that we can do here? And so that's where you can have that conversation with the young people. Now, if they're under 18, that can be a minefield in offering parenting advice. Over 18, it's a bit easier to make a direct referral. But just be mindful of how your relationship is. And I would encourage that help seeking and say, hey, would you like to call them together? So how about, even if it's your grandkid or whatever it is, can we make that phone call together? That'll take the nervousness out of it for them, and then that might help to perpetuate their help seeking.
So can I just add, because John might not have been reading this feed, but people have said they didn't understand Canteen was for children of a parent with cancer. So it's for 12 to 25-year-olds.
That's right.
Who have cancer themselves, who have a sibling with cancer, a parent with cancer, or anyone in their lives, and for bereaved 12 to 25-year-olds.
That's right.
So anyone who's 12 to 25 and dealing with cancer in whatever context can be referred to Canteen.
Right.
Important to clarify that.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that is often misunderstood. And so thanks for clarifying that.
Right. And that sort of, the answer to your question there did sort of dovetail into that final question there where someone's asking, how do you convince that carer that they might also need that help and time to themselves? So that kind of cloaking behaviour, I imagine, your partner would do that a lot to sort of try and protect the person, that's going through treatment. And
even, I shouldn't go out and see a movie because, the person who's being treated is so sick. So if you're the person with cancer, that message that, you know what, I don't need you around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It would be better for all of us if you had some time for yourself. And I think that, maybe next weekend I'm going to be feeling pretty good and I could get someone else to come and sit with me for a while you go out. So that clear communication, I'm not pushing you away, but I'm telling you that you need to look after yourself.
And that's when that patient could sneak in a poker game with his mates.
Yeah. Or whatever.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the chat box has been quite useful tonight, talking about strategies like open communications through a blog to keep, the wider caring community in the loop, so you don't have to keep repeating, where you're up to and that whole process. Sounds like that's really helped a lot of the people online this evening as well.
Can I just say one thing about spouses, because I see Ed's making a lot of comments about when are we going to talk about spouses. Spouses are a really special group. So when I talked very early on about sometimes carers being called second order patients, that applies in particular to spouses, because the whole basis of your relationship changes once your nice regular routines of going to work and earning money and planning for your next holiday gets upended by cancer. So the needs for intimacy and sexuality can really change a lot. The perception you have about the person for whom you're now caring, and it comes down to communication again. So if your relationship was not in good shape before the cancer, cancer's not going to help it. And so you really need to think early about getting some help for your relationship specifically. If your relationship was in good shape then chances are when you get through this, it will be in even better shape because you, as they say, won't sweat small stuff anymore and you'll know what's really important. What I would say to spouses, what I do say to spouses is let's make a time to address your needs individually and then together. So it's okay to ask for help on your own, which is why I said you might not want to ask for help within the cancer centre. So that might be where your GP comes in handy to talk to about what resources they have within their practice to refer you to an individual counsellor for yourself. Cancer Council Helpline can also help with that. So you might want to first look at what your own needs are and your grief and loss about how your relationship's changed and then work on it together.
Yeah. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, that's great. Just to address, I guess, that different dynamics that come with a spousal relationship. Wow. We've covered so much this evening, but before you go, some further information and support that you can access. So Cancer Council, you can call them Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 on 13 11 20 to ask all your questions around cancer. We have a range of support available to carers, whether that's through the online community. We have a lot of carers blogging on there, and I know of people have said tonight that blogging about their experience as a carer has really helped them and given them that time to, I guess, let it all go. So jump online to the online community and have a chat to other carers who are going through a very similar experience to yourself, or call 13 11 20 and hear about what other support is available through the Cancer Council, whether it's joining a telephone support group, accessing a publication and doing some reading for yourself. Lots of support available. Of course, we've spoken about Canteen tonight. Jump onto their website, to talk about anything, I guess, adolescent and young adult related. A great resource and wonderful to have John's input here this evening. And of course, if anything's come up with you tonight throughout this webinar, please call 13 11 14 to access 24-hour telephone crisis support. Please, before you exit tonight's webinar, we'd really appreciate you taking the time to fill in the exit survey before you leave. It only takes 5 minutes and it makes a big difference to how we work and improve our webinars for the future. In the coming week, we'll also send the link to the recorded webinar. So if you got caught up in that chat box or if you missed something, we will send that out with some supporting resources that the panel has referred to, so you can access some of that and do some further reading if you're interested.
And someone has just commented about Headspace, which is another great resource for young people, specifically focused on mental health. So just if you were to Google that, I think you'd be directed to services in your local area.
Great. And maybe we can pop that on that resource list as well.
Yeah, good.
Thanks, Kim. And finally, of course, a big thank you to our panel. I think we've provided some really valuable information this evening, and I know I've learned a lot, and I think the chat is testament to that as well. So thank you both for dedicating your time this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure, always.
And thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll hope to see you at the next webinar.